For a little while now, a lot of people have been asking me to cover this movie called The Crazies. I was told it's a movie right up my alley. I don't really know how to take that now that I've seen it, but I decided to give it a watch. Now, I remember watching a bit of this movie back in the day, but stopped after a little while for some reason. I always figured I got the gist of the movie, but boy, was I wrong. I pictured something along the lines of a crazy backwoods family capturing people like that one episode of Supernatural or Resident Evil 7, and the family would be the aforementioned Crazies. That's not at all the plot of the film, and this is honestly one of the more surprising and great horror movies that I've seen recently. I mean, it's a crazy movie. You'll see what I mean by that in a little bit. So grab your pitchforks, water bottles, and quit searching for a cell phone signal, because we're about to go and meet the Crazies. We start off seeing the apocalypse signs in a small town and then cut to 2 days earlier. Life is normal, with farmers, kids playing in town, people going around, and everybody heading to the local baseball game. Everything's going well until a crazy old man comes onto the field with a gun. The sheriff is forced to put him down in front of everybody, and this is where I stopped watching for some reason. It's gotta be the exact moment that I stopped watching, because right after this, we get some sort of satellite image talking about the town, and then we see some jets fly overhead. So immediately there's a lot of great mysteries built up here. We have this silent guy walking onto the field with a gun. We don't know what he's doing or why this is happening, and he won't say anything about it. I don't know, I guess we'll just never know. Then of course there's this satellite image, which throws the audience a curveball. They're playing baseball, pun intended, right before the opening title. It subverts whatever you're thinking, because regardless of the events that just took place, seeing something like this is just not at all what you were expecting. But before all this mystery and horror, we see the town and start meeting the characters. There's the Sheriff David, our protagonist, the town doctor Judy and her assistant Becca, and overall the town is presented well. Seems like a kind of town that everybody knows everybody, and when we're told that there's a little over 1,000 people, it genuinely seems that way. This is also contrasted later on in the film, and also that small apocalyptic glance that we saw to open the film. David is forced to face the family of the crazy man Rory. David tells them that he was just drunk, but the family says that Rory quit drinking 2 years ago, and David knew that. David has trouble with the aftermath of his actions, and his wife, Judy, the town doctor, assures him that he did the right thing. The next morning, the coroner calls and says that Rory's blood alcohol content was 0. The sheriff returns to the scene and finds the principal, tries to call out to him, but he's stuck in some sort of trance and only snaps out of it after a little while. The same day, Judy sees a patient that has the same sort of trance. It seems like this town has a case of the crazies, if you ask me.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
No? Nothing? Okay, well, we center on the family that went to Judy for help. Her husband has some sort of dangerous farming machine going on, so his wife checks it out, but he's not there. She hears her son scream and goes to investigate, and the son dropped his DS, so you know something bad must have happened. She finds her son, and he tells her that dad has a knife. She looks at him under the door, jump scare through the eye hole, the whole 9 yards, and then he locks the door, dousing the house in gasoline, and drops a match. David is called in that night, and he goes to the farm with his wife, and she knows that something is wrong about the whole situation. So the mystery continues to build, adding more layers to some mysterious disease or virus. I don't know, but clearly something is wrong with the townspeople. There's also this suspense factor building. We're seeing what happened to the random family and the implications of what could happen to David and Judy, and also everybody else who's already affected, like the school principal. I like that we're seeing stuff from Judy's side of the story. She reminds me of Stella from 30 Days a Night. For a second, I actually thought it was the same actress, but I'm hoping that she kind of ends up doing something else important in the film and isn't just the token blonde in these kinds of stories. But this was back in 2010, so it could go either way. Some hunters are going through the marshes and find a body with a parachute attached to it. Sheriff is called into it, and they conclude that it's the body of a pilot. So they go searching for the plane and find this massive aircraft submerged in the water. David's confused that a plane of this size crashing didn't make the news. We then see another satellite cut, and it says to begin the containment protocol. David gets worried that the plane must be leaking something into the water, and learns that the town's drinking water actually comes from that very lake, and the first house it hits is Rory's. They go to the mayor and beg him to shut off the water, but he says no, so David goes and does it anyway. They get back to the police station and see that Will has collapsed, his skin rotting, until he wakes back up and tries to attack them like some sort of crazy person. The two officers wonder why the state hasn't sent someone to pick him up, so they try to call somebody, only to realize that all the phone lines are down. So the mayor, not wanting to shut down the water because it's the main source of income and needed for all the farmers, makes sense from his point of view. But it's infuriating because we feel this sense of dread as the sheriff is unraveling the mystery. We know that it's the water supply, or at least we have every reason to believe it is, yet without concrete proof, the guy in charge isn't gonna change anything. It's honestly pretty realistic. It's hard for anybody in a position of power to shut things down, and it leads to a bunch of craziness. I also like that it's the water supply being the main reason for all of this happening. It's a great answer to an apocalyptic scenario starting, especially in such a small town. I've always wondered how long a zombie apocalypse or something like that would take to spread to small towns like this, if like it started in a city, but you never really see a story where it starts somewhere small, so this is pretty unique in that regard. The sheriff hits the town to see absolutely nothing, except a grown woman riding a bike and singing like a little girl. Oh, and some black SUV taking pictures before it drives away. He goes to the morgue to see if he can find any answers whatsoever, and he finds several grisly sights before being attacked by the coroner with a saw. He fends off the attack and outsmarts his opponent before the saw starts acting all crazy and attacks him. But luckily, the other officer, Russell, comes in and stops it. David wants Judy to leave and go to her parents' house, but she insists that she's the town doctor and needs to stay. As the argument grows, Judy says that she spotted someone outside. He goes to investigate, but hears Judy yelling from inside. So he leaves to go and check on her, and is apprehended by like a dozen armed military soldiers. They put him and Judy on a bus and transport them to some sort of makeshift containment camp. They start scanning for elevated temperatures, and Judy says that this must be some sort of virus that they're checking for. They scan the both of them, and Judy tests positive for whatever they're searching for. They separate them, knocking David out and bringing Judy into a testing room where she screams that she's pregnant before they put her under. So this movie takes a wild left turn when David walks outside and gets apprehended. It's a great moment of misdirection, sending David outside while Judy screams. It calls back to that moment earlier, and it makes the twist that much more shocking. The containment camps all seem pretty realistic and tragic if something like this were to happen, separating families and all that. It reminds me of the same sort of scene from I Am Legend. This honestly seems like something that would happen in I Am Legend, just in another part of the world, or really any apocalypse for that matter. Rarely do we get to view what an apocalypse is like from a small town, and I think this movie does that really successfully. David and some others are brought out of town to be evacuated, but he's determined to go back and get his wife. Meanwhile, Judy is still hazy from the drugs when the holding center is attacked. The infected get loose, and the military retreats. David searches for some weapons to find that they've all been taken, but he's got his own personal sheriff revolver, and bro code means everything in this world, so Russell goes and joins him. Judy's now come out of it a little bit, but she's restrained along with everybody else in the room. She talks to her assistant Becca and says that it's all gonna be alright, but then they hear something down the hall. A man dragging a pitchfork enters the room and starts offing anybody making noise in a very grotesque manner. Of course, Becca is the next to make noise, but Judy makes a louder noise to stop the man, and the attention turns towards her. Just as it's about to be the end for her, David and Russell arrive, saving the two girls. They make their way through the apocalyptic and crazy-looking town, which lands us back at the beginning of the film. They look for a car to take, but they've all been booted. A gunshot sounds, so they hide, and we see the hunters from earlier in the film on some sort of rampage, killing and taking the bodies with them. But they don't spot our group, and so they come up with a plan to make it back to David's house by cutting through the McGregor farm. He has an old car there, and they're hoping that it's gonna work. They make their way there, and Becca runs off to her boyfriend Scotty's house. After a showdown to make sure nobody's sick, they reunite and hide in the barn as more military members approach and take Scotty's mom from inside. Scotty runs out and the soldiers take him down, then his mom, and then they burn their bodies. The other four go to hide in the back of the barn as a soldier comes in, so the officers get him. The soldier tells him that his unit was brought here in an emergency situation. They didn't even know what state they were in until they got here, but it's their orders now to hunt down and eliminate any remaining people in town. He also says that he was told not to take off his mask or else he could get infected, meaning that the virus is airborne. Another soldier enters the barn, so David begs their captive soldier not to tell the others about their location and lets him go, and the second soldier asks if there's any crazies back there, and the first officer says no. I was waiting to see how it all progressed, but I think the characters are really great for a story like this. The writing makes all their personal stakes really interesting and flows with the story well. David goes back to get Judy, not only because it's his wife, but there's the additional factor that she's pregnant. Russell goes back for the sheriff, Judy takes care of her assistant Becca, and even Becca going back to her boyfriend makes sense and is a decision supported by Judy. There's small conversations that build up these characters and flesh out their reasoning and personalities while still driving the story forward, and it's paced incredibly well. There's not any moments where I'm like, okay, stop talking, now is not the time for that, and the only time that really happens is played up comedically with Russell congratulating David on the pregnancy, and that moment also adds to Russell's character, so overall there's no issue here. There's an equal amount of cliche moments, like David arriving and saving them at the last moment, and subverting our expectations moments, like Scotty being alive and fine, we expect him to join the group, just to get killed off a few seconds later. But hey, at least they got his gun now. With the military now gone, the others leave, mourning Scotty and the revelation that the virus is airborne, and make it back to David's house by the morning. Russell and Becca start working on the old sheriff's car, while Judy has a sentimental goodbye in the nursery, except Rory's family has gone crazy and come to the house for revenge. She stabs David's hand as he reaches for his gun, but he outsmarts his opponent once again. Good thing he could reach the gun from this distance. And then Russell does the saving this time, even triple checking to make sure they're dead, but this worries Judy that Russell might now be infected. In the car, Becca starts coughing, and Russell starts accusing her of being sick, and the whole group starts arguing amongst themselves. The conversation is interrupted when a helicopter flies overhead and starts circling around, so they take cover in a car wash. Becca says that she saw somebody, and then the car wash starts, taking their car along with them. Everyone gets spooked, thinking that they're all seeing things, until they actually start getting attacked. The sheriff eventually drives out and everything seems fine until one of the crazies wraps a hose around Becca's neck and they continue driving. They go and see if she's okay, but she's not. As they're mourning her loss, the helicopter flies by and destroys the car. With the revelation that the virus is airborne, it makes our group start acting a little crazy. Judy has some questions about Russell's behavior, but David vouches for Russell. In the car, when Becca starts coughing, Judy vouches for her, and everybody kinda starts turning on each other as the stress of the situation eats at them. David even yells at Judy when the helicopter flies overhead because nobody really knows what to do or where to go, and they're all scared that one or all of them have been infected. The misdirection continues, and a car wash has never seemed scarier. I think this whole sequence is super unique and played up really well. You don't know if there's something there because the only people who have claimed they see something is Russell and Becca, both of which are thought to be infected. But then they get attacked and you're like, oh, okay, nope, there is something actually crazy going on here. The loss of Becca at the end is unexpected and honestly really dark, but it gets even worse when the helicopter blows up the car. It's kicking them while they're down, and it makes the scene that much sadder. The group continues walking as a car drives by. David plans to stop it and commandeer it, but Russell throws out some spikes and takes the car out. David confronts the man driving in the vehicle, and of course it's this guy who's part of every single government in every single movie and video game ever, and he says that the virus was actually a bioweapon. The incubation is 48 hours, so after that, you're either dead or you don't have it. David then says that he's going to help them get out of here, but Russell doesn't give him the chance and shoots. As he scavenges for supplies, David takes the rifle, saying that he's going to hold onto it for a while, but Russell demands he gives it back. They continue walking at the mercy of Russell until David confronts him and outsmarts his opponent once again. Russell realizes that he's sick, but asks to keep on walking with them. When they get to a checkpoint, Russell sacrifices himself so that the others can slip past the checkpoint. They continue onward to the gas station that they evacuated everybody to at the beginning of the movie, where they ultimately realize they didn't evacuate anybody, they eliminated them all. David finds a truck that they can use to escape and gets the supplies ready, but they're not alone. All the lights go out, Judy gets surrounded and starts running to safety, almost getting caught a number of times by the hunters from earlier in the film. David comes to a rescue, they get to the truck, but they don't have the right keys. So of course, when David goes to get the right keys, they're both attacked. This time, they both outsmart their opponents and start driving away. On the radio, a countdown starts, and when it gets to 1, nothing happens. Until it does, and the whole town is leveled. The shockwave that comes from the blast flips the truck to its side, but luckily the two of them get out relatively unscathed. They look back at the blast in horror for a moment, and continue onward. Some time passes, they're in new clothes, and just as it seems they're free from the town and have made it to Cedar Rapids, the satellite zooms out, and it says to initiate the lockdown protocol. The death and turn of Russell in this movie is incredibly sad. The whole reason why he was even there was for David. And sure, we eventually realized that even if he had stayed back at the truck stop, he wouldn't have survived. But as you slowly start to realize he's turning, it makes you think of everything he's done and sacrificed and how tragic the whole situation really is. But he does have a redeeming and sacrificial death for his mentor. After this, a sense of dread and hopelessness starts to consume you, especially at the realization that nobody made it out of the town alive. Judy also clearly has an issue with checking her surroundings. I know all seems well and fine, but this is an apocalyptic scenario. Maybe have your water at the end of a hallway or somewhere you can clearly see one entrance. I was ready for another twist at the end here with the hunters. In some frames, I really thought that they weren't infected and that they were all still fine. Somehow they were gonna team up, but I realized there wasn't really anything left to team up for. While the government and these soldiers were responsible for the outbreak in the town, they're also not really the bad guys. I mean, these soldiers aren't, they're just kind of doing their job. So to have some crazy third act where David, Judy, and the hunters team up and go after the military doesn't really make a lot of sense. I thought the ending was pretty great. We see what happened when the containment level was just a town of a little over 1,000 people. So to see over 100,000 people kind of lets your mind run wild with how crazy that would be. And overall, that'd be something I'd like to see. Could have been a great sequel that had a lot of opportunities. I also learned that this movie is a remake to a George Romero movie of the same name. He came back to be a producer for this film, and after learning that, this definitely has George Romero written all over it. The zombies in this film, or the Crazies, are probably the most terrifying zombies you can think of. They still have their memories and brain function to do things like shoot guns, and they're just generally bloodthirsty and murderous. I don't think they had any advanced abilities or anything like that, but the notion of people that look like zombies but don't want to eat your flesh, they just want to kill you is pretty terrifying. In a lot of ways, this kind of feels like an unofficial Resident Evil movie. And if that were the case, this would be the best Resident Evil movie out there, which is pretty sad. I appreciate the relatively small-scale apocalypse that this movie presents. While some grand events take place around our characters, this is still just a town of like 1,000 people, so the rest of the world is still going on, and I think that makes this a little bit scarier. I grew up in a town not so dissimilar from this, and to think that if my hometown was going through something like this, cut off from the rest of the world while they're completely unaware of what's happening, that's super scary to think about. And I just can't help but think about this movie and its potential for sequels akin to something like the Resident Evil games. You could literally end this movie, but instead of it being Cedar Rapids, it could be Raccoon City, and it would lead into the events of Resident Evil 2 perfectly. Obviously, some stuff around the zombies would have to be different, but that's one of the things I love about this movie, how well it could lead into just about any apocalypse movie you can think of. Or it puts into perspective what would happen in a small town if the apocalypse started happening elsewhere. I do think there's some missed opportunities in the story, like I mentioned the hunters and how they could have played a good role of misdirection at the end, but also the soldier and the barn could have come back at the end, stuff like that. But I also think I'm kind of overlooking the fact that this is a small scale story, and stuff like that doesn't happen and doesn't need to happen in these smaller stories about two people's survival. But this movie also takes advantage of its opportunities with some great misdirection and sequences like the car wash. The characters are all pretty great and either have good character arcs or service their part in the story well. The military involvement was a great twist, and I think the story is really well written and paced. Overall, this is the best Resident Evil movie ever made, which is a shame because it's not a Resident Evil movie. I'm going 7.5 out of 10. What are your thoughts on the Crazies? I made this video because a lot of you recommended it to me, so let me know if you have any other recommendations that I'd like, and I'll try to make a video on it. If you enjoyed the video, let me know that by leaving a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Special thanks to my channel members, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Yeah.